Today on the podcast, I'm really excited to have Surbhi Guleria-Joshi. She's a TV host turned entrepreneur. So Surbhi, thank you so much for being here.
It is my absolute pleasure, Will. Thank you.
Yes, well, I really appreciate it. And I'm glad you were able to take the time. So can you tell everyone, first of all, like, how do you answer the question, what do you do?
So I am really excited and proud to say what I do right now because I am pursuing my passion, which is helping people be more balanced and complete in their mental health and overall well-being. So that's my new initiative that I'm working on. And that
Great.
makes me an entrepreneur, right? A social entrepreneur.
Right. And that initiative is called Poōrna, right?
That is correct. So Poōrna means whole and complete in Sanskrit. And Poōrna Wellness is a platform to help individuals achieve holistic balance.
Great. I want to get more into that in a bit, but I'd love to get a bit of a sense of where you start, like how you see your journey taking you to this point right now. So can you just give us a background wherever you want to start? Like, how did you end up here?
Absolutely. Yeah. And Will, I think you were the first person who asked me this question is like, what was your turning point when this kind of took birth? And I am very, very fortunate that I experienced a low point in my emotional and mental health earlier rather than COVID. So
Right.
It was, I think, probably just like everybody studies, graduates, works. And I started a business with my husband early on. And we were working like 24/7, pretty much like 14, 18 hours a day. We were at a go. But I wasn't really satisfied or inspired. And I didn't know it, that I wasn't pursuing my purpose. It was only until I had my daughter and I consciously made an attempt to slow down and said, this is going to be the time where I actually take care of myself. I'm going to be meditating. I'm going to be pausing. And that's when, during that time, the 1 year, it really hit me that I was having these roller coasters and really like time where I was like deep down and I had no idea that I was experiencing it. And when I started looking for a job after, that was when it hit hard, when I was like disappointment and like rejection. And that's when I was like, okay, what's happening here? I'm going to just listen to a pep talk and like get on with my day and like listen to like a podcast or something, which just livens me up. But at that point, I experienced something and I'm like, you know what? This isn't me. And I'm going to do something about it. And I started looking for answers. I looked everywhere, looked for natural treatments, definitely not medication. So in that search, I was constantly looking, I was constantly searching. And what came around when this COVID hit was it gave me that time again to reflect. And I knew that Poōrna was kind of brewing it inside. I'm like, if I could turn around by looking at experts and seeing what they're doing and learning from them, I could do this for other people and have that platform where experts provide feedback to individuals and help them with their mental health. So that's where it kind of took birth.
That's amazing. And I always say for entrepreneurs, if they have a personal story as to why they founded the company, especially if they've experienced a problem that they themselves wished they had a solution for, but couldn't find it or had to go through a lot to find it, then that's like the best kind of business, is because you know so intricately the details of what your market is looking for. But to keep it on like a personal level for a second, I'm really it's important for me to have a really open discussion about mental health especially in our community, but just in general in the world. So I just wondered if you feel comfortable, would you be able to tell us a bit about how your, I guess, adverse effects of your job were affecting your mental health? What were your sort of symptoms, I guess you'd say? What showed you that something was wrong?
Yeah, I was not inspired. I was going about my day and I was doing what I needed to do, but I wasn't getting that fulfillment or I wasn't getting the joy out of life. And I was constantly sort of pursuing what was in front of me without really a strong purpose.
And so what would you say, how did that affect your personal life? Did it affect your relationship with your husband? Did it affect your relationship with your daughter? Did your friends notice something? What were sort of the points? And the reason I ask this is because I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't take their mental health seriously because there's a there's a sense that we
Stigma
have
around
to
it.
be, yeah, well, you just, put your head down for 2 to 3 years and scale the company, and then you can sell it and go on to the next thing. Or, this is my passion. So when you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And there's all these sort of attitudes and cliches that surround the struggle and the hustle of entrepreneurship, which are, I believe, ultimately really damaging to just anyone's mental health, but especially someone who's working alone a lot of the time, who's accepting a tremendous amount of risk, who has a lot of people depending on them for jobs and livelihoods. And there's not a lot of good resources out there. So the
Absolutely.
reason why I ask about your specific, let's say, symptoms or how it manifested itself in your life is because I'm really interested in why, like, how do you know when something's wrong? Because everybody feels tired sometimes. Everybody feels a little uninspired, but how did you know that it was time? You're like, I have to make a change. This is not sustainable.
Yeah, totally. I think there were days when I didn't want to get out of bed. There were times where I was fatigued, and I was constantly sort of like in this search, and I knew something was wrong, and I'm like, you know what, this is like, it doesn't feel right.
It was
This
kind of like
isn't
an
me.
existential sort of dread, I guess you'd say.
Yeah,
Like you knew
and
something was wrong, but you couldn't pinpoint it.
yeah, I
Is
couldn't
that, yeah.
pinpoint at it. Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't know to seek help or like ask somebody, because that is such a thing that I'm like, yeah, it's just like just a day that I'm feeling off. But I never thought of it also like, why would I seek help? I can figure it out on my own,
Yeah,
kind of
right.
thing too. I'm like, no, it's not that bad. But I didn't seek help, and maybe it was like just the mild kind of levels of it. But I was sort of I think that's what my triggering point was, where I was like, okay, you know what? Spending that time with myself was important, and going deep down was important in order to kind of really understand myself on a deeper level. What's important to me?
Yeah.
So
Right.
I think it was a very
Okay, great.
important journey.
Yeah, for sure. And one I think everybody kind of needs to go through if they're going to be living their best life, so to speak.
Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah. And so what you eventually went to television. I'm just wondering where that is in your timeline. So you were working in a business with your husband and that didn't feel quite right for some reason. Then your daughter, you knew you were pregnant with your daughter and you're like, okay, I need to make some kind of change. And then you said you were in the job market. So when was your time on television during all that?
So that was alongside while I was working. We were building the business together, and it was nothing to do with like me working with my husband. It was just the matter that it wasn't the thing for me.
Right.
And
What was
this
that
opportunity,
business, by the way? What was the business for?
it's a tech company, and it's
Okay.
doing extremely well. And that's where sort of like he's creating his business and I'm creating mine now.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we found our niche. But
That's
I
beautiful. Yeah.
actually, yeah, I started hosting a television show, which was on OMNI and Rogers at that time. And it was alongside my first passion, which is design and design thinking. And then after my daughter was born, 6 months into it, I got another show that I was hosting, which was on the same idea of like and conversations around what's the latest happening around the city. So it was a pretty fun time. It was amazing to be on television because you get to do your nice fancy hairstyle, the makeup and everything, the whole shebang. But you know that deep down inside, it's not satisfying you because you're not really doing what you really love in terms of making that change in other people's lives. So I knew it
Right.
wasn't my real calling.
Yeah. Sorry, I think you lagged a little bit when you were talking what the show was about. So can you just reiterate that? It was a roundtable show and what was the topic
So
or
it
the
was
topics?
yeah, it was like a lifestyle show, and we
Right.
would do all kinds of things, talk about fashion and cooking and what's happening around the city, and social topics as well, and political as well. So it was like the social for a South Asian community. So it was
Right.
pretty
Yeah.
fun.
And did you feel was part of this the sense that that you weren't really helping people, so to speak, or that you weren't really affecting kind of change in the way you wanted it? Was that part because of your lack of control over what you said on television? Like the fact that you had, I guess, a script or certain, and what was that like? Because, for people, I've never been on a roundtable show. So how controlled, I guess, is the dialogue or what you're sort of are or are not supposed to talk about.
Yeah, they like the premise of it is like they want it to be more kind of a little bit more sensational, where you're confronting and making it more like a debate.
Right.
And my whole idea was like about well-being and everybody kind of agreeing to disagree and just like
Right.
getting along.
Yeah.
And even though people loved my TV personality, the content that was needed to be covered wasn't in line with helping people be their whole selves, and that was finding their happiness and well-being. So the content wasn't the right fit for me.
Right. That's really interesting because, you know, part of well-being for me, especially in today's day and age, we're seeing a lot of movies like The Social Dilemma, people talking about how social media and our current state of, you know, news and content that we consume is so polarized, and people are so at each other's throats about what we believe in, what we watch, who we listen to. And that's having a huge effect on our mental health. So it's interesting that you are kind of on a debate show trying to preach the message of, you know, let's all agree to disagree. And I think that has a huge effect on one's mental health. So could you talk a little bit about why you have this philosophy of agreeing to disagree and how you think it connects to mental well-being?
Absolutely. Like I am a strong believer that each individual is so powerful, and we have so much within ourselves that we don't even see and recognize. And we need experts like OutLoud to bring that out, right? Like we need those experts to kind of guide it through. So what I felt was that there was a need where in society where we're really looking at outside a lot, and social media has done that on an incredible level. So I saw The Social Dilemma recently as well, and I've looked at the numbers, and for younger girls, like 20, 22-year-olds, it's just horrific, the stats. And I'm saying that if I was in their shoes at this time in this generation, I would be not in a happy place. And I'd like, for my daughter, like I wouldn't want to put her through that. And I think it all comes back to a change in culture, like just the fact that stop looking outside and just like, you're unique for a reason. Your nature made you, each person, unique for a reason. Why do we stand out? Is because we are not meant to copy every other person who's out there.
Yeah.
And being authentic to yourself and being so empowered in knowing that you have that unique life in front of you. So just like being able to stand that ground, and that's why Poōrna is being created, is to help back it up with community, knowing that we're going to stand right behind you. You're not alone. So being your authentic self, it shouldn't come hard to people. People shouldn't have to worry about that. They should be able to be themselves. And that's where I think authentic conversations need to happen, like this one.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think ironically, you know, bearing in mind that this is not the reason to do it, but ironically, people who are able to be more authentically themselves and not compare themselves to other people on social media tend to do better on social media. So in the attention economy, if you put out something that's like everybody else, chances are you're going to get lost in the noise. But if you say, okay, what is it that makes me in a very real way? What is it that I like to do? And what are my weirdness? You know, what are my quirks and my idiosyncrasies and all the things that make me, that I'm maybe embarrassed about or kind of strange. And if you can lean into that and show that part of yourself on video content, on anything that you're doing to reach out to your customers. You know, most of my audience are entrepreneurs, so that's why I'm always kind of finding the angle there about what you can do to stand out, but not from a cynical perspective of saying, if I do this, I get more followers. The point is, how can you actually feel more aligned with what you're talking about? How can you feel less cognitive dissonance? Not saying something you're like, oh, that was bullshit, I don't really believe that. Or, oh, I'm doing this because I saw it on somebody else's video. But saying, I'm doing this because I care about it. And I'm doing this because I think it's really interesting or funny or important. And ironically, the byproduct is that you get more attention, or at least attention from people who feel the same way that you do. And that's your niche market. You got to find those people. So the more real and authentic you can be, the more powerfully you'll speak to those people who resonate with the way that you resonate. But I also want to say, I also love the idea of not niching and saying like, I am not for these people or I'm not for that people. I love the idea of trying to bring everybody into a conversation, saying like, how can we, how can this be for maybe people who might not be inclined to agree with me? How can I convert people who maybe think that what I talk about is stupid or useless? And how can I put it in a way that maybe they can access? So what do you do if you're, okay, well, I'd love to hear your philosophy on this, but like, do you think that that Poōrna is just for, like, your company is just for people who already identify with a spiritual need to feel more whole, more complete, more purpose driven? Or do you see yourself as somebody who wants to like make a change in the market and tell people like, hey, even if you don't think it, you need this? What is your philosophy there? And then we can maybe talk about it from your answer.
Yeah, I can totally go deep into it. And I love the fact that you brought that up, because I think right now more than ever, we really need leaders. And leadership is not for a few. I think each person has those qualities. And that's where I think leaders basically are, the idea of leadership is so misunderstood. It's like this person who's like really loud and who's like standing on stage and talking without really looking at other people. I think leadership in this world is about that empathy. And it's about the fact that a leader is someone who helps create more leaders. And whether it's social media, I think social media is just one channel, right? In your life.
Although unfortunately a massive one.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the problem with it. I think it's so ubiquitous. You can't really get away from it unless you log off. And then, whenever I've tried to do that, I've just felt as a business owner like I'm missing just the best free marketing you could ask for.
Yeah. You have to be part of it, but you have to make sure that you don't get sucked into the sort of like the negative side of not knowing who you are.
Right.
So I think it really kind of comes down to the fact that, like, for Poōrna as well, it's like each person deserves to live their whole life in the way that it's the most fulfilling. It's the most amazing life that they want for themselves. And it really comes down to you creating it for yourself.
Right.
And how do you create that is by really kind of tapping into what you truly believe and who you are deep down inside, not what other people are telling you to do.
Right. So yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to dive into that. Is what do you do to help people find their purpose?
I think it's like finding the purpose is such a journey that people have to do it for themselves. But I think we all, and especially during COVID, we all we need to take care of our well-being in order to make sound decisions. So I strongly believe that if we are in a state of calmness, mentally calm, our body is like sort of taken care of, spiritually we're connected in the sense we're calm. When we're in a calm, holistic state, we're able to make best decisions. So the idea is like we're whole when we're well, and when we're well, we're whole. So we make better decisions.
Yeah.
So when we're in like a state of panic and fear and like what's going to happen, and then you move forward in the best way to create your best life. So just like kind of how do you just make sure that body, mind, and spirit, like how do you take care of each aspect of you in a very simple way to get to a state of just being at peace and knowing that everything's going to be okay. You're fine. You're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And then operating from a sense of what's going to empower me to take the best decision forward.
Right.
So the app's going to sort of help with that.
So kind of relating it a bit back to my other question, because I'm always really interested in figuring out how you can reach people who don't already agree with the idea that mental health should be prioritized and you should really do as much as you can to stay calm. So I guess I'll talk about a couple of mine and then I'd love to hear yours, but basically kind of like the fundamentals of staying calm and present and why that's so important. So for me, what I usually talk about is meditation and mindfulness in another sense, because a lot of people think that mindfulness can only be achieved through meditation, just sitting there and noticing your breath, noticing the sensations around you, which is basic mindfulness meditation, or focusing on your breathing. But mindfulness can be practiced anytime, right? You can practice mindfulness when you're driving your car, right? Which is not, is just observing when your thoughts are going like, oh, I wonder what I'm going to make for dinner, not even looking out the front windshield of your car, and just actually go, okay, my hands are on the wheel at 10 and 2, and I'm looking, is there a person? Yeah, they're going to cross. I'll slow down. Like literally just making sure that you are paying full attention to operating your vehicle. And I don't really know the full science behind it, but I know that there are lots of studies that show that the more you can work to pay attention to exactly what you're doing in the moment, and the less time you spend worrying about something that happened earlier, or worrying about something that will happen, or planning, even just planning something, or thinking about not what it is that you're doing right now, but elsewhere, that has a huge benefit to your to things like anxiety and depression. And stress. It just kind of lowers all the stress hormones in your body. It regulates the heartbeat, and it just allows you to breathe more deeply. And then, as you said, we have a better ability to make decisions when our cortisol isn't spiking and we're not like, oh shit, and our body's in that fight or flight mode. So for me, mindfulness meditation is a big one.
Absolutely. You said it correctly. And also just to add to that, right?
Mm,
When we actually notice ourselves, if we step out of our own life experience and like notice our thoughts, we're constantly repeating the same thoughts. Like
yeah.
if we actually follow through, these are the same thoughts, the same thing that keeps recurring again and again.
Yeah.
So we're not really kind of being very innovative, creative,
Right.
when we are thinking too much.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking is a great tool, but like you said, how does it work? And just experimenting with being in that moment and just doing what we're doing right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, especially in conversation, a lot of people aren't even practicing mindfulness in conversation. I mean, the classic example is if you're saying something and then I'm just waiting to say my thing and I'm just kind of looking at you going, yeah. So here's my point. And then just coming in, I'm not really listening to what it is that you have to say. And then of course, how do you have a good conversation when you're not truly listening? But that's a great time to practice it, especially on these Zoom things, because it's so easy. You wouldn't know right now, technically, if I just like opened up Facebook on my computer, right?
No,
Like
I
you
have
wouldn't
no
be able to
idea.
see it. I mean, you might see a glazed look in my eye. You might notice that I was distracted, but I could, and that's not to mention all the people who are doing Zoom meetings and Zoom calls or talking to their families virtually because we're going into another quarantine. So the practice of staying present, even on a virtual call, when you can't really feel the other person's presence in that human way that we're evolved to, staying present, even in conversation, especially virtual conversation, is so important because it just allows you to practice that ultimate goal, which is how can you be more present, more mindful in everything that you do? How can you stop your thoughts from running all over the place, creating noise in your head, which leads to stress, as you said, the same thoughts over and over again, rumination patterns. And then that leads to also neural pathways. The more you think a negative thought, the easier that thought actually happens because of the neural pathways getting dug deeper and deeper. And it's like a bike on a dirt road. The more the bike goes on the dirt road, the deeper the tracks become and the harder it is to get out of them. So what do you like? Okay, if I was coming to you and I said, I'm really having a tough time right now. I'm feeling really anxious and stressed. Like I don't know what my purpose is. Everything kind of feels worthless. What would your advice be to me? How would you help me out of that?
So for me, I can speak from my personal experience because they're experts who would be the best guide. From my own experience, I would probably say is just the fact that we live in a society where everybody is living in their little bubble. We're so isolated. I think it was there before, but now it's literally like physically
Yeah.
true. We have to really kind of change that paradigm because I think everybody right now is craving to be seen. The fact
Right.
that they're listened to, that they matter. And like that, I think the screen is a great connector, but at the same time, it's really hard to kind of be present with a person where you actually know that they're being heard and they're being seen. When you do that for another individual, we don't even know, but that triggers something in the other person that they matter.
Mm.
And that eventually comes back to you.
Right.
That little thing, that little moment that we're present, it is so important, not
Mm.
just like, oh, what am I going to get out of it? What am I going to
Yeah.
get out of meditation?
Yeah. Yeah.
How is this going to benefit me? But once we start actually making a difference in other people's life, and that's what true leadership is.
Mm.
How do you actually listen to another individual that makes a difference in their lives, and they go out and change something and they feel like a leader? That's a true
Right.
leader. And I think when you do that, you're empowering yourself by just helping other people, being there for other people. And I think not being so caught up in our own little bubble. I think it's like we have to get out and take that effort to connect with people, and especially like-minded people. I
Mm.
think that's what's going to really save us, is just like get that community going where we feel alive and we're like, you know what? This is the best time ever because we're going to make a difference right now.
Yeah.
So
Right. Yeah. And I know, like, in all the books I ever read about like happiness or, self-help stuff that I've come across, and I used to read a lot of those, and still do to some extent. There are still some self-help books that I find quite helpful and useful and interesting, even though there is a lot of fluff out there and stuff that's kind of either too obvious or not backed up by science, or not ultimately sustainable. But some of the best self-help stuff that I've ever read that seems to recur is put yourself into the service of others. The more you can serve other people, the more purpose you will feel in your own life. Because ultimately, if you're not doing anything for anyone else, there's always going to be a bit of an emptiness in what you're doing. So I think you hit it on the head, which is that if you can find somebody and really listen to them and make them feel seen and heard, the exponential kind of ripple effect of that as it spreads out to the world will be a lot more profound than you might think, as well as having just an immediate effect on your own sense of purpose and well-being. If you can truly show up for someone and make them feel better, well, then what a great thing you did that day. And that can, 100 of those over a year can start to create a real change.
Absolutely. And you're doing that, right? You're making a difference in people's lives. And I think we need a lot of people to just take that stand, that why it is important. It's not self-care because it's selfish. It's the fact that you are in the service of others when you know that you're taken care of.
Yeah.
So you're not living in the scarcity of there's not going to be enough for you. Like, we are really intelligent beings. That's why we survived for generations. And our livelihood is one of the basic things. If the animal kingdom and the insect kingdom can do it, humans can totally do it for themselves. So just knowing that we are very intelligent beings, but we're even better when we are working together. So
Yeah.
How do we form that human connection is really going to come down to knowing that you're okay, you're going to be fine. How do we start taking care of other people?
Yeah.
And for that, you have to take care of yourself. Make sure you're okay.
That's the classic, analogy of the oxygen mask on the airplane. They tell the parents that you have to connect your own oxygen mask before you help the kids, or before you help anyone else. So you put your own oxygen mask on first. And that's the classic analogy that gets used is if you are a coach or an entrepreneur or somebody who helps other people for a living, or a parent or a friend or anybody, or a dog owner, like if there's anybody depending on you, you are not doing them any favors by not taking care of yourself. And I'm sure, and I don't know, as a mother, maybe you can speak to this, but do you ever feel like a guilt for your daughter about what you feel like you should be doing for her, but maybe there's a detrimental effect to yourself? And how do you manage all that?
I love that. I love this conversation because it's like we're conditioned for so many years growing up to think a certain way, and to just kind of like break that mold and to carve something for yourself, you have to kind of be aware of why you're doing it. For my daughter, like I knew I had to be present for her when I'm with her. I consciously took up meditation because I want to make sure that I'm present with her. And that was like what, before she was going to be born, I took that on myself. And I'm like, how do I make sure that I'm growing? So I started looking into hypnobirthing and then conscious parenting and natural ways of being in rhythm with how nature is meant for us to live and thrive. Because if we really look, like what happens in nature is really like what human lives are about. We are looking for growth. We naturally want to grow. Humans are the only creatures who actually stop their own growth by worrying and overthinking and like stopping ourselves from growth. Growth is inevitable, and that's what feels natural. So just learning is one thing. Like, how do we get better and grow into the person that we were meant to be? I think what you're saying is like a lot of people know all of this stuff. Like the books that are out there, they tell you, like, it's really simple. Okay, sleep better, eat better, exercise, think positive, and like the basic things. Everybody knows it, but we don't do it. Like, why don't we do it? Why do you think we don't do it? It's like,
to me, I think it aligns. It aligns with what it is that you're doing. Is that if there's no purpose behind it, then short-term gratification is so much more fun in the short term. Obviously, that a lot of I always tend to look at it from an evolutionary perspective. So a lot of things that are evolutionarily bad for us are so pleasurable in the short term, which I always thought was such a strange puzzle. Like, why is salt and fat and sugar so addictive if it's bad for us? And then I started reading, and, you figure out all these things. And I don't know if there's consensus in the scientific community, but the idea is that because those flavors were so scarce, in the wild, and we were sort of subsisting off like berries and fungus and animal meat. If you came across a honeycomb randomly, you'd be like, oh my God, I got to shove this in my face because I never know when I'm going to find the next one. So then when I read that, I was like, no wonder I have such a problem with junk food. And when you think about it, as you said, if you think about how humans are programmed by our evolution, by nature, so many of the destructive habits that we all have make so much sense, and we can stop kind of beating ourselves up for them. Of course, we're going to want to gorge on all this food that our ancestors wouldn't have had access to all the time. How could we handle the temptations of this? Of course, we're going to want to, like, how could we handle the temptations of social media when they've been psychologically engineered to keep us on them through data and through, the smartest people in the world figuring out, how can I keep your attention on this page a little longer? How would we stand a chance? And I think that once you realize what's going on in an evolutionary sense, and from also a societal sense or a structural sense, like who's behind the scenes, like, playing with our attention, and what forces are at work driving our impulses, then you kind of start to see yourself a little more human and stop beating yourself up, being like, oh, I can't fix my sleep, I can't fix my schedule. And then ironically, once you forgive yourself and let go a bit of the like self-flagellation, you get better at regulating those things, because you go, okay, well, I want to, and especially if you have a business or something you're really passionate about, there's a reason to withhold, because you say, well, I can't be a good business owner if I'm not going to the gym regularly, because I can't sit still and focus if I'm not going to the gym regularly. Even if I don't like the gym, I'm going to go, because there's a deeper purpose, which is me showing up for my clients and showing up for my business and making sure that it's running well. So even if I feel like crap, I know that there's a reason that I'm going to the gym. And my mom always said something interesting to me when I was younger. She said, nobody ever quit smoking because they're worried about dying in the future. They quit smoking because it's making their life worse now. They don't want to be short of breath anymore. They don't want their fingers to smell or their clothes to smell. They don't want to spend money on the cigarettes. So they quit smoking and that's what you also kind of have to do. You have to program yourself for shorter term incentives. You can't say, well, if I don't go to the gym, then when I'm 80, I'm going to have osteoporosis. Like, that will never work on anyone. We can't think that far. So for me, the mental health pitch to people is, wouldn't you like to spend less of your day freaking out, worrying, feeling that, even subtle as it is, feeling that subtle sense that something's wrong? Wouldn't you love for that to just fade a little bit? How do you do that? Well, you have to just work on being present and forgiving yourself and letting go of stuff that you can't control. And if you just put 2 minutes a day into that, eventually you start to understand the principles, and then you can kind of apply it. Whenever you start to freak out, whenever you get into an argument, whenever you're driving and your mind's wandering and you realize you should be watching the road, it becomes easier and easier to pull your attention back to what you're doing. Let go of all the tension you're holding in your body. Just exhale it out and just go, everything's okay. And I'm just driving the car right now, or I'm just talking to my spouse and I'm just trying to, do this. And then you can kind of relax. And then those are the building blocks for making good decisions, as you say. Sorry, that was a whole lot of
no, that was
ranting,
great.
but
that was amazing. Yeah, no, that's absolutely true.
Well, I think we have to stop it there for today, just for time. But thank you so much, Surbhi. I really appreciate you coming and spending your time here and hearing about Poōrna and all the great stuff that you're doing. And please keep pushing this mental health message to the world, because I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, no, I appreciate, Will, what you're doing out in the world is also helping people be self-empowered. It's more than self-help. It's the self-empowerment movement that we're creating. And I think we need more and more people to join the movement and not fall prey to what the ancestry or the society has conditioned it to be. We create what we want to. So that's great. Thank you so much.
No problem. Okay. Take care, Surbhi.
Thank you.
Bye.